Hi, everyone. It's lovely to have so many of you from all over the world. I see people from the States, from England, from Canada. Thank you so much for joining us from Singapore. Sorry, Richard just jumped in. South Australia, Adelaide, and Sweden, everywhere. Thank you so much for joining us. This is an incredible topic and very important to us, talking about bird trade. We have a fantastic panel. So I'm going to quickly introduce them first, and then we're going to move into their presentations, but I will share with you, we have a bit of special treat with a video that just got launched earlier this week that we'll share with you. So allow me to start with Anush. Anush Jain is the bird trade coordinator for BirdLife Asia. He's based in Singapore and has been working with us for quite some time. Anush is one of our stars in the BirdLife Asia regional team. He will make a presentation about the situation and what we are doing with bird trade in BirdLife. We will have right after him Benny Siregar from BirdLife in Indonesia, Burung, Indonesia. Benny is the Biodiversity and Conservation Officer for Burung, Indonesia, as part of the Conservation and Development Division. And he conducts ecological research about birds in the Lesser Sunda and the Maluku regions, but also investigates the parrot trade across Wallacea. And works on campaigns and mainstreaming biodiversity actions amongst the Malukus. So it's lovely to have you, Benny. Thanks so much for joining us. And last but definitely not least, Yap Chin Ike from Malaysian Nature Society, the BirdLife partner in Malaysia, who's worked with M&S for 20 years. He's currently the lead investigator and co-founder of M&S Hornbill Conservation Project, and also the senior conservation officer and the project manager in M&S Conservation Division in the Secretariat in Kuala Lumpur. While working with M&S, he's carried out various bird and non-bird conservation initiatives and works very closely with the BirdLife International team on updating the status of globally threatened species of birds for Malaysia and the important bird and biodiversity areas, the IBAs, in several regional bird-related projects. So we're going to have a fabulous panel with these three lovely guys who are going to tell us the difficulties and the challenges that we are actually facing with bird trade in Asia. But before we jump into their presentations, we wanted to share with you a 4-minute video. It's an animation that has been put together by Burung Indonesia, our flight in Rangkong, Indonesia, partners of Burung, by the great, extraordinary support of RAS Animation. It is very hard-hitting and is very emotional, but I really think it's very important for you guys to see it because it really highlights what we're working to stop. The song and the lyrics are in Bahasa Indonesia, but the images speak so well for themselves that you're not going to need translation. So bear with us. After the video, we will have the great work that Benny and Yap and Anush are going to share with us. But in the meantime, let's take a look at this video for a second. Sarah, if you can put it on.
Kicau burung bernyanyi, tanda buana membuka hari.
Tanam rumput memudar, menyongsong fajar.
Sejenak ku terlena akan kehidupan yang fana.
Nikmatlah cinta, rasa nista berpadu satu.
Serasa pagi tersenyum mesra,
Bertiup bayu membangkit sukma.
adakah esok kesenyum jua,
Memberi hangatnya sejuta rasa. Serasa pagi tersenyum mesra. Bertiup bayu membangkit sukma. Adakah esok kau senyum jua? Memberi hangatnya sejuta rasa.
Okay, so it's, as I said, incredibly hard hitting, but incredibly important to raise awareness of the very difficult challenge that we're facing trying to get these birds protected. So I'm going to pass it on to Anush. We're going to start with him. So he's going to share with us what we are trying to do to stop this and make sure that these birds continue to fly and sing freely. Anush.
Thanks, Patricia. Well, I'm Anuj, dialing in from Singapore. With that video, I think I don't need to explain you why we want to welcome bird trade. I will start off by giving an overview of the trade and talk a little bit about the songbird and parrot trade. I will then pass it on to Benny Siregar from Burung, Indonesia, who will walk us through parrot trade in Wallacea. And then over to Yap, who will walk us through the Hornbill conservation initiatives. So bird trade and hunting is a huge problem. Used to be underestimated, but increasingly so, being recognized as a major driver for species extinctions in the region. We already know 62% of threatened birds in Asia are impacted by hunting and trade. That's a huge number. Mind you, species already threatened. And more studies are showing us that this is the impacts are catastrophic. Hunting and trade, when combined with deforestation, combined with other threats, are bringing more and more troubles to birds. We are also all very, very familiar with the COVID-19 pandemic. Last year, we heard lots about wildlife trade impacts, and of course, many theories about the origin of COVID. We saw many wild trade markets being shut down all over the world. But fast forward in the past year or so, we are seeing growing impacts of the pandemic on hunting and trade of wild birds. This is a photo shared by a collaborator in Timor-Leste, and this story is being repeated, whereby more and more birds are being killed, often for subsistence, because people, especially in rural communities, are being marginalized as livelihoods are being lost, income sources are being lost. But this is not a simple problem to solve, right? With COVID-19, as it's getting harder and harder, we know that the trade is complex and it actually forms multiple aspects or dimensions. First being birds that are hunted for food, as you see on the previous slide. Subsistence, less of an issue, but when these birds are being traded, either for recreation, delicacy, the scale and volumes tend to be bigger, and that is when it starts to have larger impacts on wild populations. We are only beginning to understand the impact of this trade through our illegal killing of and hunting of bird situation analyses all over the world, including Asia. But watch out for this space. We will have a separate webinar to share more. Today, however, we will talk more about the cage bird trade parrot songbirds. And then finally about ornamental trade in ornamental products such as hornbill casks, feathers, other associated products, which we will touch upon. So in tackling this complex problem, we try to break it along the supply chain. At the source side, BirdLife and the partnership has traditionally been working very hard to protect sites and species, and we are ramping up our efforts. Today, you will hear more about that in Malaysia and Indonesia. But along the supply chain, we are trying to do more science, highlight issues at the policy level, so systematic higher level changes can be made. We are sort of working with other NGOs and partners on the supply chain and market monitoring, supplementing their efforts. And then finally, as you will hear later, we are really ramping up our efforts in changing behaviors, which will ultimately have real impacts by reducing demand and overall reducing the trade. And here again, you will hear more about work from partners. So let's dive in. First off, the most well-known trade of all in Southeast Asia and larger Asia is perhaps the songbird trade. We know many species are impacted. The Asian Songbird Specialist Group specifically deals and works around protecting these species in the region. But the impacts are far-fetched, ranging from Indonesia, but also Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, China, so on and so forth. Perhaps the most startling of it all is the Javan pied starling, a bird where more than 1 million of them are in cages, but none are left in the wild. We've this species only been recently recognized as a full species, but we've known its situation for a while. Recently highlighted by a new paper by Bas van Bellen and BirdLife scientist Nigel Collar. Soon after, there were many emergency meetings called for. People from ASTSG, specialist group, zoos, etc., got together, and we are now thinking, how can this bird be bred in conservation breeding programs and released? But it's not that simple, right? We have to figure out, once they're captive bred, where should they be released? So we need to secure safe havens. And there are many people who are thinking about protecting these sites at the source levels. While that is developing, for Javan pied starlings, we are slowly tackling a bigger problem, which is looking at the songbird supply chain, trapping, trading, and keeping. Burung and BirdLife, with support from our partner VBN in the Netherlands and March Conservation Fund, we are really piloting a behavior change approach. What we want to push for is sustainable trade, such that zero wild caught birds would become the norm in the trade. Harder said than done. This is a complex issue, working with breeders and everyone along the supply chain, but we are slowly but surely seeing positive impacts. We are seeing people responding through a changed mindset. More and more, especially youth along Indonesia, are beginning to take up bird watching, and forest monitoring. And I think once this scales up, I think we're going to slowly but surely change behaviors and norms that keeping a wild-caught songbirds may not be acceptable in a few years to come. Moving on, another aspect of the trade, the parrots. Again, globally, a very well-known and well-traded and species well-known in the trade, to the point that more than 1/3 of parrots are globally threatened. But in Asia, less well-known. Today, we will talk a little bit about another demand center, less well-known, but right here in Singapore. This is a work in collaboration with the Nature Society and Mandai Nature. So some years ago, we began to realize that richer cities like Singapore are seeing a craze in parrots, right? In Singapore, in particular, more and more people want to buy bigger birds, more expensive birds, And a third of them, when we investigated, are actually still coming into the country from wild-caught sources. Mind you, these are legal, but the onus is, of course, in countries that are exporting them for all sorts of different reasons. But on the global sense, yes, they are negatively impacting populations. So we are concerned for that reason, but also poor welfare, poor hygiene, and a lot of them in transit actually die. When these birds do arrive in the demand countries, such as Singapore, some of them establish here, as shown in the bottom images, and they could then compete with native species. They could also introduce diseases, and we obviously know wide-ranging impacts of that. So we started investigating more. If demand is increasing, why are people keeping these birds? How are their interactions with the bigger stakeholder community, and what is their understanding about conservation? Right? First of all, we found that more and more people across age groups, all age groups are getting involved, more and more kids. Also, parrot owners are generally richer, more well-educated, and they're really buying these birds for companions. Bigger birds, as I said earlier, but then driven by this culture of hobbies groups. Right? And as we mapped these different relationships, we found that these hobbies groups are really the center of the trade here in Singapore, or as we think of it. But promisingly, when we ask people about conservation, more and more people, or over 70% of people said that they disapprove of wild parrot poaching. They are also willing to pay more for sustainably sourced birds and wait longer to actually sustainably source to get these birds as well. So that is really encouraging for us. With this conservation ethos in Singapore, and hopefully other richer cities as well, we can slowly begin to change mindsets here. We are not against the trade, but what we're saying is how can we actually move this trade to species that can be sustainably sourced, easily captive bred, and have minimal impact on wild populations. Now, moving on to a different dimension of the trade in India, we are tackling a much bigger and lesser well-known problem. India itself has long-standing issues. Until 1990, the country was a huge exporter of birds, native birds, but all that stopped for good. But only in recent years, exotic bird trade has picked up. Right? Most of these birds, most of images you see on the screen, so 1 and 2 are native birds, but then large proportion of the trade is actually comprised of these easy to breed, what I call domesticated exotic birds. And that's been going on. But now we are finding that more and more birds are actually entering Indian borders, and India is slowly becoming a cross-border trade hub. Birds coming in from Bangladesh, Myanmar, and with poor implementation of CITES in the country. So we are really ramping up our efforts with BNHS, our partner in India, to inventorize what is actually coming in through porous borders, who are the players involved, and then develop some policy recommendations. Because we are finding the capacity to actually identify and implement CITES, identify birds that should be protected by CITES and actually implement CITES is low. And I don't need to say, with growing wealth in India, the scale is huge. Shown here, this is not an isolated case. A lot of rich people are keeping birds. Palm cockatoos here, for example, are obviously not native to India, hard to breed in captivity. And then these numbers speak for themselves. Increasingly, we are finding that the domesticated birds, budgies, cockatiels, and lovebirds that formed the bulk of the trade in the past, and they were coming from captive bred sources, are now being targeted due to welfare rules, but these rules are actually targeting very small tribal trappers who are barely making a living. And so we actually fear that if these domesticated birds are being, domesticated exotics are being removed from the trade, the tribal trappers have no other option. They were trapping native birds 30 years ago, that stopped. And if now we're going to stop their livelihoods from cockatiels and budgies, they perhaps may shift to smuggling exotic birds. And that will be a huge, huge problem on a global scale. Not an easy problem to solve. We are again taking the demand reduction approach, capacity building approach, but we can't just work at demand centers. We are working very hard, as I said earlier, to secure safe havens at our field sites all over Southeast Asia, here shown for parrots. And with that, I will pass it to Benny, who will speak more about Wallacean trade.
Thanks so much, Anush. Go ahead, Benny.
Thank you, Anuj. And hi, everyone. My name is Benny. I am working 7 years for the parrots issue in Indonesia, mostly in Wallacea regions. Here I am to share information about the parrot trades in Indonesia. The Maluku Islands, which consist of 2 provinces in Indonesia, have long been hunting ground for parrots since the 1990s. There are 21 species of parrots in the regions. 3 of them are the most threatened trapping, which is chattering lorry and white cockatoo from North Maluku and salmon-crested cockatoo from Seram Islands. Recent research in North Maluku show a drastic decline of parrots populations, leaving about 20% from the 1990 database, also including salmon-crested cockatoo, whose population are declining in the several locations. In addition to population and illegal trades information, there are still many gaps of information on the ecology of these parrots, about how they can survival rates, a breeding behavior, how far they can adapt in the rehabilitation process, how about their home range, how about, and many other things that we need to be researched further. Based on the study and investigation conducted by Burung Indonesia in North Maluku, trapping parrots is almost occurs in all areas, from the northernmost region in Morotai Islands to Obi Island in the south. These birds are trapped by villagers who live close to the forest. This ability is passed down by generation to family and close relative. Currently, road access has been opened to the remote area. This condition makes it easier to smuggle birds in small quantities and make controlling even more difficult. The increase in trapping parrots also driven by increasing in demand, causing higher selling prices from the trapper, up to 900% from the baseline in 2007. The desire of local residents to keep parrots as pets also did not appear to be decreasing. Research in Obi Island in 2012 shows that there is 27 of households that keep parrots. The difference of today compared to the 10 years ago is nowadays there are no more families who depend on their entire household economy from the selling parrots. From this point of view, this is a progress. However, even though the number of hunters is decreasing by the number, but the number of bird coughs is not significantly reduced. What we are doing to combat these illegal trades is by implementing several strategies. First is we mapped the extent of parrot trapping hotspots. Second is providing assistance to and training to the strengthen law by enforcement by governments. The third is monitoring trading activity by involving the village community. And 4 is conducting targeted awareness to the community and government or agencies. In the past 2 decades, Burung Indonesia has mapping a trade routes from the parrots, including trade to the foreign country. The largest source of trade parrots is come from Wallacea and Papua regions. Parrots sold from coastal village, it's brought to local cities such as Tobelo, Ternate, and Ambon. From there, it's transported to the cities such as Manado, Makassar, and Surabaya as transit city. In some cases, bird can be smuggled directly from North Maluku to overseas, such as Philippines, using small boat with 2 passengers capacity. Transporting by sea is the most preferred method by smuggler. They're using large ship owned by private company, and they can dock in any ports, any place they like. They can hide parrots in the hidden place, such as ship's engine room. Mostly parrot has died in the transporting process. Some progress has been made in recent year. Burung Indonesia has worked to address important species issues in Wallacea through a long-term campaigns and advocacy that result in the full protection for all parrots in Wallacea in 2018. We fully support the government effort in law enforcement, effort that optimize more seizures and optimize the more resolution of wildlife crime complaints. In the grassroots, Burung Indonesia develops awareness about biodiversity, creates alternative livelihoods for the community as a way out of activity that destroy nature. Permaculture began to be practiced to meet the daily food needs. We also succeed in encourage young people to create communities, building organizations that care about biodiversity and species protection. Now they have done a lot of awareness on their own way. Then we talk about citron crested cockatoo, which is an endemic subspecies of Cakatua sulfurea species. This cockatoo is only found in Sumba Island in Lesser Sunda Island. The existence of this species has been lost in the several places. On Sumba Island itself, the species can only be found in 19 locations out of 25 locations that have been recorded since 1950. This species population has drastically declining from 1990 to 2000s due to illegal hunting and habitat loss. Sumbano has only have 6% of good forest cover of the entire islands. Forest fire occur every year, and their intensity is getting higher due to climate change and causes many fragmented forests. Research from 2011 to 2012 on the breeding ecology found that the Sumba cockatoo population can be restored by preserving and remaining forests, including those are not protected area. Burung Indonesia has concentrated effort involving national park, police, laws enforcement, including local governments and parliament, aim to the saving the species and developing alternative livelihood by inviting ex-catchers, trappers to monitor parrots for more than a decade, which has succeeded in significantly reducing the illegal trades in Sumba. Hunting and trapping and trading was observed to be completely ceased in the late 2000s. However, recently there is a new evidence of cockatoo trapping activities. Monitoring by the community is starting to weaken, and especially in the area that's not protected area. This activity need to be prevented as soon as possible before this hunting activity took place everywhere again in Sumba. A prolonged pandemic time can lead to weakened controlling of animal crime in the villages. There is no other way but Burung Indonesia need to support the law enforcement by the governments in Sumba. And roasting sites are the most important locations. These sites need to be protected and monitored. Furthermore, there aren't many of them. Reflecting on the success elsewhere, the roasting site monitoring involving community in Sumba needs to be carried out by the trained community. And the last is the community needs to be given a new spirit to run more alternative livelihood through the entrepreneurship. Collaboration and understanding are the main things in optimizing conservation effort. Burung Indonesia, supported by CEPF, have collaborated with 9 conservation area managers in the Wallacea regions since 2018. This collaboration has raised the spirit to protect not only parrot, but also important species. Well, that's all. Thank you. Back to you, Anuj.
Thanks so much, Benny. All right, with that, we're gonna pass it on to Yap.
Hi, everybody. Greetings from Malaysia. My name is Yap, and I work for the Malaysian Nature Society. I also serve on the hornbill specialist group, so we look at all the hornbills in the world, and also with Anuj, we also work together in the helmeted hornbill working group. So let me share my screen with you. So for today, just let me take you on a short presentation to share with you about the plight of the helmeted hornbill, and to give you some idea of what we are currently doing. So I think by now, everybody would have known how a helmeted hornbill looks like. So to also bear in mind that right now this bird has two important initials. It's C and it's R. So critically endangered according to IUCN right now. And in Asia, we have 32 hornbill species. But one of the most special, unique hornbills is definitely the helmeted hornbills. So they are monogamous. So they pair for life, and they are normally found in all intact tropical rainforests. And we generally do not know much about them, but apart from just knowing that they do breed every year, they do breed and produce a chick, and when they do. They do produce one chick, but they not necessarily breed every year. Their diet is also pretty unique in a sense that they are known as fig specialists. So I think if you can remember the video that you saw just now, the poacher taking aim at the helmeted hornbill. So because that they feed in figs, that could be also a weak point where poachers exploit and then shoot them. And at this moment, we really do not know how many helmeted hornbills are there in the wild. But I think safe to say that they don't come in large populations, and they are restricted to just a few countries. As you can see, the map that I've shown you now, they can be found only in Myanmar, southern parts of Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei. And what is more alarming is that with their small numbers, the numbers are probably declining due to forest loss and poaching. And at this point in time, helmeted hornbills are under great stress because of poaching for their casts, because of a small sliver, a part of their cast which is solid. They're hunted for that part, and they are turned into trinkets. And the problem of poaching sort of surfaced in probably about 2013 when our Indonesian colleague brought this to our attention and says that, hey, I've been investigating about this issue of reports of helmeted hornbill being hunted. And what he found was absolutely shocking. So he estimated that in 2013, they had shot at least 6,000 helmeted hornbills in Indonesia. So that is 6,000 dead birds, probably an entire population in several locations obliterated. And this is not surprising in a sense that he told us that when he went back to some of his sites in some of the protected areas, the forest is now silent. There are no more calls of helmeted hornbills. So for this reason alone, and what we call an issue that came out of nowhere, nobody saw it, the conservation status of this bird, of this hornbill, from near threatened before 2015 suddenly shot up to critically endangered. This is like taking an express bus, from point A to point B. So this is probably the biggest jump for any hornbills that we know in terms of conservation status. So the world began to get to know about helmeted hornbills, I think, way back in 2016, when Nature Society Singapore, our Malaysian Nature Society's sister organization, we proposed a motion to the IUCN World Conservation Congress on the conservation of helmeted hornbills, which basically the motion points to the need to pay attention to this issue and take some actions to start looking into the issues and to address the issues. So it is to our relief that it was adopted, it was passed during the General Assembly and was adopted on 1st September. So with that motion, we now, the international community is now at least aware of this issue. And subsequently, after that year, we start to see more conservation organizations, whether it's international or national governments and international donors putting resources to try to start tackling the issues. So if you're keen to know about this motion, I've put a link there. You can take a look. And not long after the IUCN meeting in the same year itself, CITES, this issue was also brought to CITES. And the status of helmeted hornbill was again successfully uplisted to Appendix 1, which basically means that member states which are party to CITES will not be able to trade in helmeted hornbill. So this is actually an important step in combating illegal trade. For us, the range country, one of the most important, if not at this point in time, the only document to guide us in investing in helmeted hornbill conservation is this document which I've highlighted. Now, in it, there are several goals, but I'll just focus on one, which is goal 2. And under goal 2, there are three objectives, 22 actions, and high priority actions. So basically, there's a lot of things that needs to be done on the ground by many stakeholders to deal with this issue. But basically, the gist of goal 2 talks about various aspects of habitat protection, keeping the forest, restoring it, managing it, and community empowerment. So for the subsequent slides, I will share a bit more on the community empowerment part, because I think that is probably one of the most important tool, one of the most important weapon that we have, that we need to cultivate against poaching of helmeted hornbills. So for us in Malaysia, the Malaysian Nature Society works in Belum Temenggong Forest Complex, which is located north of Peninsular Malaysia, bordering southern Thailand, and it is an important bird and biodiversity area. This area is huge. It's more than 350,000 hectares. So another important point about its size and its importance is that it is one of the remaining large contiguous forest landscape for Peninsular Malaysia, northern Peninsular Malaysia, because it joins also the forest on the Thailand side. So this is a very important landscape for MNS, and we have been there working on conservation, including hornbills, for quite a long while now. And as I said, we call the place fondly BT, and BT is a place of immense biodiversity, and you can see a lot of wildlife there still thriving, and also plants as well. Plants are also equally important. Let's not forget that. And Belum Temenggong is one of the areas in Malaysia, one of the 2 sites in Malaysia that supports all 10 hornbill species that is found in this country. So needless to say, that is one of the reasons we also work there. And the landscape, the central piece of this landscape is a dam, but this dam was created in the 1970s, and it has created a large water body also as well. Now for us in MNS, one of the early things that we did is to work with the local indigenous communities in this landscape. Belum Temenggong is home to at least 5,000 to 7,000 Orang Aslis, or indigenous peoples. So there are many different tribes of Orang Aslis in Peninsular Malaysia. And in this landscape, we have the Jahai and the Temia of both of which we work together under this project. So these hornbill guardians are trained with modern hornbill conservation techniques. But at the same time, we do not exclude their knowledge. In fact, their traditional forest knowledge is crucial. So it is an intermarry between modern conservation techniques and traditional techniques. And that is how we do hornbill conservation in Belum Temenggong. So some of these hornbill guardians have been with us for more than a decade, working with us. So the relationship that we have is quite strong. And thanks to Foundation Segre and BirdLife for the next 3 years, we will continue to work with this community, and as well as another group of indigenous wildlife patrol unit, which I'll share later, to upscale the work in to upscale the hornbill conservation work in the Belum Temenggong landscape. So we do a lot of planning together, and I do a lot of mentoring with them. So basically, it's we eat together, we work together, and we suffer together if we can, to pursue hornbill conservation work on the ground. So you can see that they are trained in many skills. They can GPS trees. They look for hornbill nests. They document feeding trees, and they are also our important ambassadors to other Orang Asli villages in the landscape. And because of that role and because of that visibility, sometimes we are not able to work with all the villagers, but the villagers know who to turn to when they have, let's say, found injured hornbills, or some hornbill issues that they would like to share with us. So working with them for a long period of time, we have finally documented some of our learning lessons in a paper that was recently published by the IUCN Policy Matters. And this was a part of a 3-volume special issue on environmental defenders, and it was launched during the recently concluded IUCN World Conservation Congress held in France. So if you're keen to find out about, read about this paper, I'm happy to provide the link. But I think what we wanted to draw attention to here is that getting Orang Aslis involved in conservation, whether it's hornbill, in this case it's hornbill, or wildlife conservation, is not the norm yet in Peninsular Malaysia. But we have demonstrated that it is not impossible for them to be part of wildlife conservation, species conservation, or even habitat protection. But we have to work with them long term, and we need to have sustained resources to do so. That is absolutely crucial. This is the other local community group that is currently working in the same landscape, BT. And I highlight here because they're also an important component in Belum Temenggong where wildlife protection is concerned. These are called the Menrak Patrol Unit, and it was created by the NGO called Rimau. Their focus animal is actually tiger. They are responding to our tiger crisis also as well in Peninsular Malaysia. And they, like MNS, they work with the Jahai and Temia people within the landscape. And they have been patrolling, supplementing the work that's done by the state park rangers in Royal Belum to ensure that the tigers population does not come under more threat of being poached. And to a certain degree, this involvement of Orang Aslis is quite a unique and successful example. Now, many of us who work with local communities in terms of hornbill conservation can more or less trace our roots back to Thailand. The concept of hornbill nest protectors or hornbill nest guardians, if you want to call it, actually began in Thailand under the leadership of Dr. Pillai Punswat, global hornbill expert, and her work in the Thailand Hornbill Project. So their work in Budo Mountains, which is at the southern part of Thailand, they work with the Muslim local villages to do a lot of searching for hornbill nests at the same time, to monitor them, to protect them from poaching also as well. What is also equally unique about this kind of work is that you can see that women is also very much a part of it also as well. So this young lady called Nurehan, recently has been a focus in documentaries showing that women are almost also as capable as men in doing hornbill conservation work in the group also as well. From Thailand, it inspires a whole lot of us, and in India we have colleagues from the Nature Conservation Foundation working with an indigenous people tribe called the Nishi tribe in the Eastern Himalayas, and they also more or less mimic the same thing as what the Thai did. So they have been, this initiative has been going on for quite a while, and they also have been showing various degrees of success. In Indonesia, it's more recent. This is mostly in Kalimantan. We have NGOs called Planet Indonesia, and my colleagues also in Rangkong, Indonesia, involving in turning or encouraging local communities to be forest guardians in 2 different locations in Kalimantan. And what is particularly sweet is that through even at this point in time, their early efforts, they have been at least able to find or to document one of the nests in helmeted hornbills, which has never been found for many years in Kalimantan. So engaging the community there is definitely the right step. So I have shown you more or less the involvement of local communities in combating hornbill poaching. But if you recall, at the same time, it is also equally important to look at the remaining forests in the range countries. So we have to identify where are the helmeted hornbill important sites in all those range countries. For Malaysia, and starting with Peninsular Malaysia, MNS have identified important hornbill landscapes. There are 14 of them, and this sort of serves as one of the prioritization process that we have in channel resources for hornbill conservation work. So we are trying to also replicate those kind of work in Sabah and Sarawak, East Malaysia. So forest is equally important. Without the habitat, the birds also will not survive. So coming back again to the issue of poaching, if you remember, 2016 was the year that the motion got passed in IUCN Congress. Not long, in fact, a few days just after the motion had been passed and adopted, local authorities, the wildlife authorities in Malaysia, seized hornbill parts from a poacher, and this on Malaysian soil. So that is the first time that it is done. It has happened in Malaysian soil. But the origin of those beaks probably came from Indonesia. So up at that point, we still don't have reports of birds, helmeted hornbills, being hunted or being poached from our forests yet. And in the last few years, including this year and years ahead, the government has been quite serious, starting with Peninsular Malaysia, has been very serious in wanting to tackle the poaching issue. And actually, this is very focused on tiger, because our tigers have been dwindling due to poaching and the use of snares also as well. So they have launched a nationwide intensive and extensive exercise to sweep the entire Peninsular Malaysia of snares and of poachers. And this was a huge, huge effort involving multi-agencies led by our wildlife department called Perkhidmatan in Peninsular Malaysia. It involves protected area rangers, it involves the forestry department, it involves the Malaysian Army, the Royal Police, and other authorities also as well. And they have been successful in bringing down the poaching numbers and eliminating snares. Now, although this exercise is not targeted on hornbills, but it has a direct bearing for helmeted hornbills also as well. Because with less poachers in our forests, then the bird, the hornbills, will be less exposed to be poached. So it has direct benefits also as well. And I'm happy to share that this effort is still being continued for the next couple of years. But at the same time, as I said, while the government is investing heavily on this, all the sites that have helmeted hornbills or any other hornbills right now also need to build up their defenses. And to us, the local community is sometimes the first line of defense. Sad to say, just last month, I think, in fact, the news broke on our National Day, 31st August. For the first time, Perkhidmatan again managed to seize 8 hornbills, 8 individual hornbills, in a consignment that was heading to Europe, if I'm not mistaken. And they seized it at the Kuala Lumpur International Airport. What is actually alarming in this case, in that 8 species that they confiscated, a juvenile helmeted hornbill was part of the species. That actually marks the first time, and probably this bird is poached from somewhere in Peninsular Malaysia, that this is from Malaysia. So we can say that, you know, is this going to be, is this going to grow larger? We don't know. We hope not. We hope this can be an isolated case. But more importantly is to, I hope our colleagues at Perkhidmatan is able to interrogate and find out where the bird came from. So at least we can, there'll be more targeted actions. But it also shows that perhaps poachers have successfully entice or persuade some local communities that live in the forest, near the forest, to look out for these birds and to poach if there's an opportunity. So unfortunately, this is the first case really, and I hope that it will not further escalate, because if it does, then could we be looking at the same scenario like Indonesia in years to come? Because, you know, poachers can decimate helmeted hornbill populations quite easily. So I hope in this talk we're able to at least show you that the problem is already very severe. But in terms of tackling the problem, there will be many different approaches, and the approach that we are using right now under the regional species conservation plan is to look at habitat protection and also to engage local communities. Local communities in this Orang Aslis, or non-orang aslis, but local villages must be cultivated to be our first line of support, supporting our government authorities in enforcement, in intelligence, in also maybe just deterring, poachers, not giving them a foothold into the forest and poach the helmeted hornbills that's there. But to do this, as I said earlier, it needs to be long-term. It needs sustained resources to do it. Because when you engage local communities, you cannot be doing work for only 3 years or even 5 years. You need to be there for a long time and as long as you need. So thank you very much for listening. And I take this opportunity to also thank all the donors in the previous years that has supported MNS. And we cannot be doing this work without the support of our government authorities, our forestry, our Perkhidmatan, Royal Belum State Park, and my colleagues at the IUCN Species Specialist Group. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yap. There are a series of questions, and I want to start. I want to kick them off quickly because we're running out of time. But before doing that, I will follow on something that Yap just said. Thank you so much to all of you who have supported us. We are just seeing how the donor box is starting to move. So thanks so much for those of you who just donated. And please do share the appeal with your friends, your colleagues, your family. We need more support to make sure that we stop this barbaric practices. I have tried to organize, there are excellent questions right now, and I'm trying to organize them in a way that we can flow them as quickly as possible over the last half hour that we have. Let me start with the more policy position on bird trade, and I'm going to try, Roger, can you try to unmute yourself and see whether we can hear you? Sarah, how can we check if Roger's being heard by the audience?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly well, and I'm assuming that the audience can. All right, so let's start with the policy question. The BirdLife position on bird trade. What is it? Is it about zero tolerance to bird trade, or are we in favor of sustainable trade? What is it? And also, can you give us a little bit of a sense of what's the situation Australia-wise and Nepal?
Thank you. Yes, good question, and I'm happy to have a crack at it, particularly the general point about policy. Overall, we're looking for sustainability. However, there are quite a few dimensions that will also affect our position on any given situation. We have absolutely zero tolerance on a whole range of trade-related actions, and some of the things you've just been hearing about, I'm sure you will see that they are completely unacceptable. Some of the trade in the helmeted hornbill body parts, some of the parrot trade, and so on. So this is quite unacceptable. However, some other points need to be considered. We need to consider disease risks to people, and this is something we're learning about all the time. We don't have a full understanding of this, and we're learning all we can. We need to consider welfare as well as the species conservation and population situation. We need to involve local people in all that we do. In what we do, we must not exacerbate poverty and inequality where it already exists, and some measures might have a risk of doing that. And we should consider captive breeding ideally as a way to complement efforts to achieve conservation in the wild. So those are the main points, as I say, sustainability, but zero tolerance of quite a lot of what we see. Regarding the more specific questions about Australia and Nepal, I think it may be best for me to hand over to people from the region, from closer to the action on these areas, to see if we have any information on those, if I may.
Okay, so before we actually move on to Benny and Yap, and Anush, let me just get another one from you, Roger, and it's more related to the captive breeding that you mentioned. There was a couple of questions about that, not only in terms of captive breeding, but also knowledge about how to handle the birds that are being captured and seized, and how to make sure that we manage them. Any word in terms of our position on captive breeding and examples of that? And number two, do we know of systems and I don't know, learning processes about how to handle these birds when they are actually seized? Because I think part of the problem is also that they get seized and then no one knows how to handle them and then they die in the process.
Okay. Well, our position on captive breeding is really the general view is that we're not opposed to captive breeding, but we believe that it should complement the conservation of wild populations. And in some cases, you know, this is likely, in fact, probably most, it means we want 0 wild caught birds going into trade. And that's maybe a realistic way to deal with some of these problems. In terms of handling of birds, well, we BirdLife are more the experts on conservation on the ground in the wild, and so in order to come up with policies and advice on these things, we would need to to partner with more specialist captive breeding and management organizations. In terms of what to do with seized birds, there are quite a few risks there. There are disease risks, there are risks that they might be released into the wrong places and therefore establish unwanted populations where they could interfere with related species. I think we have to take each of those as they come and advise when we are requested to, usually through the partner in the country concerned.
Super, thank you so much. All right, let's move on to, there's 2 lines of questions here. One about songbirds and how important it is to work on the demand and the discouragement of the song competitions and all of that. And then there's another one about hornbills and casquets and what happens with the demand side of that. So let's start tackling songbirds. And here I'm going to ask Benny and Anush to jump in. So there's a couple of questions from George and Thierry. And Thierry, I hope that you're doing well in Myanmar. How are we handling the discouragement of the song competitions? I mean, Benny, you started mentioning about the role of, or in the presentation, you were talking about the role of the young people and how they are becoming bird watchers, and hopefully that's actually starting to change some of the attitudes. But between you and Anush, help me understand, how are we discouraging the song competitions that is such a traditional thing in some places in Indonesia?
Yeah, in Java itself, that the hobby for keep songbird as a pet, it's also come from the parents. So encourage the young people since very young is the one of the best solution to them to knowing about how the impact of the wild caught the songbirds in the wild. The movie that you saw in the opening, it is one way to prevent the songbirds in the future to being catch from the wild.
Great. Anush?
Yeah, just to build on from that, again, there is a big songbird team now in Burung, and you know, they are working on many different dimensions of it, as I said, along the whole supply chain, with communities on ground, similar approaches, parrots, changing mindsets as we talked about, but then also working with breeders. You know, there are different organizations, Burung plus also through USAID Bijak project, and lots of discussions now happening with different stakeholders. And within them, we want to identify champions. Yeah, we also have to fundamentally acknowledge that, you know, songbird in Indonesia have big socioeconomic repercussions. A lot of people depend on this hobby. Therefore, anything that we do has to be taking that into account. And until all of these people are dependent on this issue, we can't really take it away. So we have to slowly change livelihoods, give different alternative livelihoods that are more sustainable, and then identify breeders that are also willing to champion with us the cause of captive breeding. So that's the approach we are taking slowly, and surely we are definitely seeing some friends, some champions that are on the side of conservation. So I'm personally optimistic that we are moving in the right direction.
Great. And just going back on the markets, sorry, I just lost this. There was a question about whether there are laws that prevent bird cages. I mean, there was a specific question about whether it's Mumbai, but I was wondering if there are specific laws about the caging and trading of birds in places like Indonesia.
Again, if I may start off specifically looking at India, it's become a very complex issue in which I shared some dimensions of it: exotic trade, non-native species coming to India, numbers are skyrocketing, but equally a smaller subset, right? Species that are easy to be bred in captivity, traditionally kept, are being targeted because of welfare issues. So yes, there are welfare issues that and welfare laws that are now sort of discouraging the keep of birds. And depending on who you ask, people would have different opinions, right? The welfare groups believe that no bird should be kept in the trade in the current conditions, too small cages, all that, right? But then, as I highlighted earlier, there's another dimension to it, that if we discourage the keep of these common birds outright, common, easy captive bred birds outright, then we risk moving trade underground. So there's going to be more smuggling and all that. And we are already beginning to see that. So it's definitely not an easy answer and one fit all solution.
Yeah, and that goes back to a question that was related to how much does the government actually know that this is actually happening and that it is a problem. So let's move very quickly into, I want to make sure that we leave some time for a helmeted hornbill because there's a lot of questions about that as well. So there was a question about whether the caskets and the trinkets that are being developed or in the ornaments that are being done on the caskets are going to places like Singapore and other markets. So it's not only, in my understanding is also that it's going to China, correct? Yeah, the market.
Yeah, I think I've answered that question. I've typed it and sent it off. But just to let everybody know, I think as far as investigation and reports that has been published by Traffic Southeast Asia and perhaps other similar organization type have done, is that it's going up to the East Asian market. So that I think China is probably the biggest market. Anuj can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you also probably have Hong Kong. You also have is it Vietnam or Laos? Also some Indo-China countries also as well. So that is the end for the helmeted hornbill products. So the range countries are unfortunately the source for the poachers.
Yeah, agreed. There's a question about sorry, I'm having trouble with for whatever reason my Q&A is not working properly. There was a question from Vicky Yap about the specialization of these poachers, and she wanted to know whether the poachers are specialized for hornbills, different from the ones that are going after tigers and other species. Do you know this is how specialized this situation is?
I think based on what we have seen, the results of the arrest and results of their arrest and investigation by these ops that's been done that I mentioned. They are more targeting high value mammal targets. They set snares. So unfortunately, tiger gets in, and any other high value or collateral damage wildlife will also be snared also as well. But they are also here to tap on the agarwood resources in Peninsular Malaysia. So as far as you know, they don't specifically target helmeted hornbills at that point, but you never know, it might change. So this case of recent case of arrest, could perhaps point to involvement of locals. So most of the sometimes this kind of trade is perpetrated also assisted by locals. The locals are the one who's go and find the birds and then return it to the seller. So the seller just issues a want list, and then if they know that the area has helmeted hornbill, if they manage to persuade a willing person within the community, then probably they will go and look for it and hunt for it. And this is not actually very strange, because in the past, in the early years in 2016 or 17, I can't remember the exact year, our hornbill guardians have also been approached also as well in town, coincidentally. So that at that point gave me the impression that people are snooping around already. They're sniffing the ground, they are assessing the situation, they are tempting any willing bodies, to try to look for it. They may not know exactly where it is, but in a case where they approach our hornbill guardians, they ask, hey, do you know this bird? Do you have this bird in your forest and things like that? So luckily, our hornbill guardians say, no, we don't have these birds here. Okay, so go bugger off. So, but that already gives us an indication, gives me an idea that people are snooping around. It's very, very silent. It's very hard to track. And that is why I said that, we have to build as many local communities as important helmeted hornbill sites to be the first line of defense, to get them over to our side before being persuaded to join the dark side. So we do not want them to go to the dark side, because if that's the case, it's going to be very difficult to reverse. The government have their hands full in enforcing. They go into the forest and they catch the poachers red-handed or disarm and all that. But in this case, right, this is very silent, and it's even harder to catch. And if you catch the poacher, the bird is already dead. And it's also even very hard to hear. There's no snares. You can just shoot the bird and chop off the head, and that's it. It's even harder to detect, compared to other high-value wildlife targets and even agarwood. That you have to lug. So it's very, very silent in a way. To also, I think Vicky's question about illegal logging, that is also another different kind of situation. I can't find the question now, but I think needless to say, Malaysia has been giving a lot of focus on illegal logging, and I think we don't really have a lot of illegal logging right now. I think any illegal logging is very sporadic, very small. But I think the better question to ask is, how can we improve forestry? Current forestry practices, because there's no way that the government, that tropical countries will not immediately say, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to do logging anymore. So logging is sustainable forest, logging under sustainable forest management type of prescriptions. We need to ask the question of, how can we still have helmeted hornbills in logging concessions? How do we do it? And how do we also tighten the way forest concessions are managed to disallow poachers from coming in? And also at the same time, if you have local communities there, it goes back to the same question, how do we get local communities involved? That is the kind of question that we need to ask.
Yeah, great. And I think your example of involving local communities and indigenous communities, making them and enabling them to become extraordinary forest rangers and supporters of wildlife is an excellent one. And many people have been asking for the link to the publication. So I think you shared that already. Technology. Can we talk a little bit about technology? There's a question about would technology that functions like a Pokédex help, like the Pokemon Index device, help? Imagine sampling traffic samples at the airport and then head to the source of origin of the samples in the morning. Have we tried technology? Yep, you are nodding.
I'm nodding because I'm thinking, what are my colleagues in the government authorities doing actually at this point in time? If I understand, or at least seen some of their work, I think they are slowly gearing to use genetics as part of the tool to combat wildlife trade also as well. I'm not a geneticist, so I left my genetic knowledge in university, unfortunately. So, but in using that tool, as far as I know, you need to develop a genetic library first, right? You need samples to compare. You need to know, like for example, helmeted hornbills in Belum Temenggor, is there a unique fingerprint? Helmeted hornbills in Taman Negara National Park, do they show differences? If you have that in your genetic library, then if you ever get seized dead hornbills, and you do forensics, then maybe they could point to its origin. But like I said, I think it is a tool that the wildlife authorities are developing. Certainly, I'm quite sure Perhelatan has already embarked on it. They have forensics lab. They are, I think, strengthening it, and I think probably doing up a wildlife DNA library is part and parcel of something that they want to invest in for the next couple of years. So hopefully, the kind of materials that they need, including hornbills, if our project is able to help them, then we're more than happy to support our wildlife authority in this case.
Thank you. Sorry, I have the questions in front of you guys. Anuj, you wanted to jump in?
Well, I just wanted to say, I fully agree with Yap, but we must also acknowledge that all the genetics work, or most of it, is being done post-trade, meaning birds when they're dead, forensics will be done to sort of identify and, bring the victim, the convicts to court, right? But how do we actually avoid trade? Yeah, I don't think we've done enough to using technology to handle that. And in Southeast Asia, for example, we are far off from it, realistically. You walk into any market, birds are not ringed. Yeah, we don't even have a basic ringing system that can be safely traced back, which can trace back the birds to the origin, right? I think that should be the first step. Yeah. Then more complex things, while we want to, sort of think about them and get excited about, in reality, they are far from reaching the ground, in my opinion. Yeah.
I want to finish with one more question related to Facebook and social media, and how they are actually serving us as channels for the trade, but also how they are actually channels for sharing the songbirds, the birds of the song, the songs of the birds, and whether that would make it better or worse. And I wanted to pick your brain, the three of you, all of you actually. The songs are so beautiful. I mean, we heard it on the, we've heard them, and but would sharing them in social media make it worse, the demand worse, or would it help us control the market? And I know that their Facebook and other Alibaba, for example, have been means for trading birds, and we're trying to tackle those areas as well. But any word about that? The pros and cons of social media? Anyone? Did I put it too hard?
Okay, I can start on that. Well, for one, we're seeing social media has made it a lot easier to trade in birds, right? Now, at the click of a button, you can literally order any species from the planet, depending on which country you're in. So it's a big problem for us, and a lot of big organizations, traffic included, are engaging with different social media companies. How you tackle that, right? How can we turn that to our advantage? Could bird songs really help? To me, it's a little bit like watching Rio, right? It can inspire us, to protect parrots in the wild, or, for some, they might want to keep those birds. And in my opinion, it's in the eye of the beholder, really.
Yeah, agree. Benny, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, agree with Anuj that myself is facing the social media is like facing a giant problems in it. So, but I believe that the somehow in the very optimist that we as a scientist also, the people who concerned in the conservation issues, that need to encourage more engineers also who have skills in the ITs or computers things, that the at least social medias that using for media as to trade the illegal birds or illegal wildlife. It is we can get the big pictures from the metadata, so we can have we can point which one is the main string or the important target to be for the to the people, to the target. So I still very optimistic that the media social can be a good thing for us, and also because it is like a fair ground for us to showing who's the best, which idea is the best to be campaigns by the social media. So the more people knows that we need to protect more birds, we need to protect the habitats, and it can be reach everyone in the world. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely, I agree. It could be a double-edged sword. All right, we have 2 minutes to go, and I just wanted to thank all of you who have donated so far. It's been great to see the donor box moving. As I said before, please share it with your friends and family. Your support, your contributions allow us to keep pushing this agenda forward. You've seen from the video and from the presentations of these guys how important it is to tackle it quickly. It's in some cases taking an incredible toll in these beautiful species, and we don't want them to see it going extinct in the wild. So help us share the information, and thank you so much for joining us and supporting us. And thanks to you guys, Yap and Benny, and all of you at Burung and MNS and all the BirdLife partners, BNHS and others that are working on trade, enabling us to stop this and turn around the fate of these fantastic birds. Yap, did you want to say something before we finish?
I think I would like to thank everybody here who generously give us your time in listening to a very pressing issue that we're all trying to solve. It's going to be a long journey, but while conservationists do the work, the public can also play its role. through social media. It's also, it can be a double-edged sword. We'll just find a way to harness the goodness of social media and not use it for the dark side in this case. So thank you again for listening. And if you have any interest in M&S work, please feel free to contact me or anybody in M&S. And thank you again to BirdLife, Patricia, for supporting M&S work for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Benny, for taking the time to walk us through all of the great work that you guys are doing in the Moluccas and in Indonesia in general. It is a really sad situation, and you saw it from the video. Sarah has shared with you the video link, so pass it on. We want that to go viral and hopefully help us turn the tide on these birds. Thanks so much to Anush and Roger for jumping in. And we'll see you in our next webinar. It's lovely to have so many of you, and thank you so much for following our work.